So what is ubiquitous assimilation?
Always absorbing everything everywhere all the time.
Well done, George. How are you to imagine anything if the images are always provided for you? Who here read 1984 last year? To deliberately believe in lies while knowing they're false. This is a marketing holocaust. 24 hours a day. For the rest of our lives, the powers that be are hard at work, dumbing us to death. So, to defend ourselves and fight against assimilating this dullness into our thought processes, we must learn to read, to stimulate our own imaginations, to cultivate our own consciousness, our own belief systems. We all need these skills to defend, to preserve our own minds.
Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it just is. It just bloody well is. Especially when you arrive every week at the virtual Alexandria, that state of mind where East meets West, through the revamped God above God that can. It's so much fun when we're building vast futures of light for you, when you extract that sacred and profane mystery that works for you and only you. It's so much fun when and while you face this rusted machine universe, you can echo the sentiments of Robert Frost when he wrote, "Forgive, O Lord, my little joke on thee, and I'll forgive thy great big one on me."
Well, it was nice to meet you, God. Thank you for the Grand Canyon, and good luck with the apocalypse. Oh, and by the way, you suck!
And certainly echo William Blake when he wrote, "The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. You never know what is enough until you know what is more than enough."
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
And we've had more than enough of this strip mall reality, and we can't get enough heresy here at Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, or ABGR as some have called it. Welcome, you lords of deconstruction, you Johnny Cash bodhisattvas, you words made unflesh. Welcome, you generation without a king over it, as the ancient Gnostics were referred as. Welcome to the greatest adventure you'll ever experience, as we continue on this dark odyssey through the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy, all the way to the farthest shores of imagination. It was Clark Emery who said, "The awakening of any individual is a cosmic event." And it is I who say, the awakening of any individual is a cosmic rebellion.
You have to consider the possibility that God does not like you, never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. This is not the worst thing that can happen.
It isn't.
We don't need him.
We don't agree.
Fuck damnation, man. Fuck redemption. We are God's unwanted children. So be it.
And who am I? I am you. Both of us remembering we are higher than the gods, as the apocalypse of Adam declares. I am and I am Abraxas, your psychopomp and mystagogue and Gog and Magog, as well as your madmen across the waters of creation. In his meat sack incarnation of Miguel Connor, broadcasting from the lawful and frigid dystopia of Chicago, patiently waiting for the beginning of the world.
Human beings were not meant to sit in little cubicles staring at computer screens all day, filling out useless forms and listening to 8 different bosses drone on about mission statements.
Gnosis is certainly one of the tools for our fun in heresy and spiritual liberation. The main one, perhaps. I always liked Stephen Heller's definition of gnosis. That is, salvific knowing, arrived at intuitively, but facilitated by various stimuli, including the teaching and mysteries brought to humans by messengers of divinity from outside the cosmos.
What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
Take that as literal, psychological, or philosophical as you want. Your mileage may vary. But remember, as Jeremy Puma said, that gnosis is not the result, it's what brings results. And as he stated in his book, How to Think Like a Gnostic, gnosis is not enlightenment, it is the receipt of living information. That salvific knowledge Stephen Heller refers to, that transformative data from the plasmate of Philip K. Dick that makes you into a homoplasmate.
I am an immortal.
You're not a god. It's not possible.
Well, maybe the real God uses tricks. Maybe he's not omnipotent, he's just been around so long, he knows everything.
Furthermore, the great Dick said in his exegesis that gnosis is different than mysticism, because mysticism grants a view of supernal realms, while gnosis may do that, but focuses on the nature of our counterfeit reality and the counterfeit spirit that comprises most of who you believe you are. Gnosis looks everywhere and analyzes everything. And thus it is an intellectual pursuit, as much as New Agers won't admit, because that goes against their spineless granola and telemarketing principles.
You're messing with my Zen thing, man.
Hoopra! The Gnostics didn't hate reality. They faced it directly and exposed it as a temporal stew comprised of the ego ejaculations of hating angels, the neurotic menses of a vain Gaia, and the stinging tears of a sleeping mad god having terrible dreams.
God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Our astral guest will cover these topics I just mentioned on this late October, the year of our Demiurge 2014, as well as so many other incendiary modern issues and their relation to Gnosticism. That is Scott Smith, who incarnates at the virtual Alexandria to discuss his new book, God Reconsidered, Searching for Truth in the Debate Between Atheism and Religion. For more information on Scott and what a truly superlative truth seeker warrior he is, please visit his website. That is GodReconsidered.com.
I'd rather die than go to heaven.
God Reconsidered is a sober read, but with an intoxicating conclusion. Scott exposes the cracks in the two pillars holding up Western culture: New Atheism and traditional Theism. But he doesn't go all Chicken Little on the reader, but more like rooster-headed Abraxas, crowing about a third column that might detain the sky of human progress from collapsing. Could the tenets of an ancient heresy known as Gnosticism buttress a crumbling civilization? God Reconsider makes a case for a resounding "Sí, señor."
Today we are canceling the apocalypse!
Scott, being a true Gnosticoi in the ethos of Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, aptly addresses the idea of suffering on both book and our interview from a Gnostic standpoint. And that Gnostic standpoint was one of the reasons I was grateful to abandon orthodoxy and the New Age delirium. I was glad to no longer accept that suffering was caused by two nudists and their indigestion of bad fruit, or that suffering was a wispy illusion of a deity playing hide and seek, even as Jews were incinerated in concentration camps. That suffering was a learning process leading to Oprah personal growth, even as kiddie porn and pedophilia soak society. Or that suffering was just a byproduct of an accidental universe that came about by the reverse discovery of the demigod Neil deGrasse Tyson. Between Ebola and ISIS, it is evident suffering is real and programmed into the very fabric of the cosmos.
We're born alone, we die alone. Everything else can be fixed with Photoshop.
Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something.
Maybe there are no literal archons or a demiurge, but the Gnostic stance at least granted me a healthy starting point to doing something about suffering, a fighting chance. With that salvific knowledge and the exposing of the rulers of this age and deconstructing reality and accessing the central energies of lost feminine archetypes. With that attitude of skepticism, geekiness, and curiosity. And that having so much fun with heresy. Suffering is not my fault, says the Gnostic approach, but it is certainly my responsibility in the end. And there is no end, only the continual and romantic journey of Gnosis. The rest is a footnote as we place our foot up the rectum of Jehovah and his angelic mafia.
Yes, these are bruises from fighting. Yes, I'm comfortable with that. I am enlightened.
In the Nag Hammadi library, Dialogue of the Savior, Judas asks Jesus, "Tell me, Lord, what the beginning of the path is." Jesus answers, "Love and kindness. For if one of these existed among the archons, wickedness would never have come into existence." And I do like the advice and promise of the Gnostic path of Jesus in the secret book of James. It goes, "Hearken to the word, understand knowledge, love life, and no one will persecute you, nor will anyone oppress you, other than you yourselves."
If we have souls, they are made of the love we share, undimmed by time, unbound by death.
Please support Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio in any way you can. A few shekels here and there. Any assistance you might have, like marketing, design, or procuring for me the lost director's cut of Roadhouse. Please don't forget to support my Patreon campaign, where you donate every time I produce. And together, we can continue growing one of the greatest heretical communities in the history of the multiverse.
And I suppose the most you can hope for is to make some kind of difference. But what kind of difference have I made? What in the world is better because of me?
There are linkies at thegodabovegod.com that lead you to various manners to support this Promethean venture. Your support is essential, and much appreciation to you crazy diamonds who support this Red Pill cafeteria on a weekly basis. We're going to do so many wonders together. I just know it. I just know it. And while having so much fun with heresy. But enough of my drivel. Let us to the interview with Scott Smith on his dangerous but necessary book, God Reconsidered.
What kind of church is this?
This is the Church of the Atheists.
Oh, what does that mean?
Oh, it means that they don't believe in, God.
Oh, like Skwisgaard and Toki?
No, we are nihilists. We don't believe in anything.
Can a nihilist also not believe in God, too?
I don't know.
Quiet.
Hail God, whom we do not believe in. Let us all not pray for you, whom does not exist in any rational realm. Oh no, we're being picketed by agnostics!
Agnostics honor the possibility of there not being a God.
Get up!
They hate each other. This is gonna be awesome.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of having on Scott Smith to discuss his new book. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm all ready to rock and roll, and for your listeners, I've made it easy to remember. It's not out yet, but there is a website called Reconsidered.com, and any of your listeners can go there and see what the latest status is. I'm hoping at least the ebook will be available in November.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it should be perfect timing once this interview comes out. And again, thanks for joining us. So why don't we start with the beginning, or more or less in the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself, specifically your spiritual hitchhiking, and how it led to your present belief system.
Well, that's a good metaphor, because I certainly can't claim to be the originator of the discussion of the ideas in the book, but I had a long and interesting search, especially the past 25 years or so, and I promise not to take so long in discussing the actual journey, but it is a longish answer to put things in context. So I had the advantage of growing up in a Mormon household, and the advantages were, as I think most people probably know, Mormons are very pro-family. My parents told me I could be anything I wanted to be. It was my mother's idea, who had majored in journalism, that I should become a journalist, which I eventually did. And I had a fairly orthodox life up until I was 17. And the thing about Mormonism that people may also know is that Mormonism is not your standard Christianity. Every effort has been made by the church to reposition it as basically, we're just like the Baptists, except we don't believe in drinking coffee, but it is quite a radical religion, and there's a reason why the fundamentalists are always having protests every time the Mormons open a temple, because you could say that there are certainly esoteric or pagan elements to it. Among others, Mormons believe that human beings can become gods and create their own planets and so forth. And Harold Bloom has written a couple of books, The American Religion and others, where he notes some of the really interesting aspects of Mormonism. And one thing that makes it a little bit of a cousin of Gnosticism is that every member is supposed to have his own personal revelation, illumination, while the church leaders provide guidance to the whole church. There is an emphasis on personal knowledge. And what happened at 17 that started to throw me off that track was I got something in the mail about vivisection, which is the scientific use of animals for medical and other purposes, and I was really horrified by it. And I went into a dark night of the soul for about a week, and I prayed for an answer. I thought, if Mormonism is really true, as most devotees believe, then it has to address this issue of why animals suffer so much. And Mormonism is one of the very few religions in the West, as I discovered, that has a very robust animal liberation theology. It regards animals as having souls. We have an obligation to treat them well. And this led to my first book, Animals and the Gospel, and eventually I wrote another book called The Soul of Your Pet, Evidence for the Survival of Animals After Death, which, amazingly enough, about 20 years after the first publication, you can still buy on Amazon. Now, Other than that, I led a fairly orthodox life. I went on a mission to Germany. By a series of miracles and coincidences, I co-founded Vegetarian World, which was one of the first national vegetarian publications, and I sold that to Vegetarian Times in 1978. And through this period and into the 80s, I was increasingly interested in how to look at Mormonism from the standpoint of kind of the wider world of religion and to answer its critics, especially among the Protestants and the militants who think it is not a Christian religion. So I began speaking at Sunstone, which is an annual conference on Mormonism for progressive thinkers. And meantime, I was researching the supernatural. I did an interview with Scott Rogo, who is one of the great parapsychologists of all time. And I asked him, as I was becoming a little confused about what the truth was about the supernatural, and this guy had written like 30 books. In 1990, I said, so what do you make of the whole thing? You know, what's your overarching theory? And he says, you know, I'm more confused than ever. So for us mere mortals, that meant the search for truth would be quite difficult, needless to say. And I began writing for Fate magazine, and I had a chance to interview some really interesting psychics, or people who claim to be psychics, like James Van Praagh and Uri Geller, and to test them. I met some truly extraordinary people who had amazing miracles in their life, one of whom was Thomas Males, who was a leading expert on Native American stuff. And he told me several very dramatic experiences in his life that caught my attention, including the fact that he was a hardcore atheist teaching architecture in Berkeley, and one night he woke up and there was a man with monk-like robes standing at the end of his bed who said, you are going to serve God no matter what you try to do. And then the monk disappeared. So he got up, he looked through the whole apartment, turned off all the lights, and that changed his life, needless to say. So I had all these so-called adventures with remarkable men and women. And the one little pea under the cosmic mattress that was disturbing me was the UFO business. And I originally began to study it just for fun. I thought, well, you know, certainly you can't prove anything. I mean, this is a lot of wackos combined with maybe some true things that we're never going to be able to prove. So I started delving into it. And the abduction phenomenon began to be very disturbing. This Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, C.D.B. Bryan, whom I interviewed, wrote a book called Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, which refers to abduction. And basically he said at the end of the book, which is how I was feeling at the time, was, you know something, if I go any deeper into this, I'm really going to go crazy. You know, it becomes a hall of mirrors and Alice in Wonderland. So I went through a crisis in January 1989, which was triggered, oddly enough, by a few things. One was this search for the truth about the UFO phenomenon. And this was the first time that Sunstone turned down one of my proposals to give a lecture. And I kind of felt like I was on my own to figure this thing out. I couldn't really discuss it in public. And I had just gone through the landmark forum, which some people would think of as EST in its earlier incarnation. And at least for Californians, on the morning that this experience happened, I began shaking violently, apparently in relationship to the cold weather. I mean, this was like the first time I'd ever seen snow in my yard. And then all of a sudden, over the next 2 hours, I had a mystical experience. It was definitely an altered state. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't any of these components particularly. But over a period of a couple of hours, I was shown the essential insights in my book, and particularly that all the little pat answers that all traditional religions, including Mormonism, give can't be true. And so that was really the start of kind of a free fall in looking for the truth. And it took me some years to kind of recover from that radical experience. And it wasn't the whole Gnostic illumination. I did have, interestingly enough, about 5 months after this, an experience on ayahuasca and magic mushroom, which really made me feel like I had entered the glory of the gods. And so I had that to kind of retain and hold on to, but it didn't really answer all my questions. And so I was adrift for some years, and I would fall into drinking now that I had given up Mormonism and so forth. And, there was a real kind of crisis that went on until 2005 when I discovered Gnosticism. And I went through 8 years of Jungian psychotherapy, and I didn't really see the connection then between Jung and Gnosticism. And I would say, incidentally, that I'm no authority on Jung. I'm reading right now this fabulous book that was reprinted recently by Alfred Ribby, R-I-B-I, on Jung and Gnosticism. So I'm learning a little bit, but I don't get in too deep in that in the book. Now, one last thing in my spiritual journey that I should mention is my life has been filled with all kinds of strange, serendipitous experience, not the least of which is that I met my soulmate, and she is one of only 2 people that I have ever met, and her name is Sandra Wells, who's now my wife, who is not just psychic, but she is a true magician who can call up the spirits. And most people who claim to be ritual magicians are just faking it. She's the real thing. So she was very comfortable with my embrace of Gnosticism. In fact, she'd been going to the lectures for many years given by Stefan Heller in Los Angeles. So I had no idea when we got together. And we have gone around the world. I was a travel writer, still do this once a year. We've been to India, Saudi Arabia, all over the world, and wherever I go, I have a chance to talk to people about religion. So the journey continues, but that's kind of the arc from my spiritual crisis at 17 until I discovered Gnosticism in 2005.
It's a fascinating spiritual hitchhiking, and I can certainly draw parallels to my life and probably a lot of the listeners. So your book, God Reconsidered, proposes an alternative path to the 2 pillars that are tenuously holding up civilization, theism and atheism. Scott, why don't we start with the problem of the pillar of atheism, or more like new atheism? How has it not served to bolster human culture these days, even in these allegedly enlightened secular times?
Well, I'm glad you asked about that, because one of the reasons I wrote the book is to counter some of the propaganda among the atheist reading public, because I've read the books by a lot of these guys, and I'm just astounded that intelligent people buy into this stuff, because I had quite a bit of experience interacting over the years when I was writing for Fate with the 2 debunking or hardcore skeptical groups, the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, which used to be called the Committee for the Scientific Claims of the Paranormal, but the acronym was PSYCOP, and I think they thought that was a little too accurate in terms of the way they approached the supernatural. And they published Skeptical Inquirer, and then the Skeptic magazine is published by the Skeptic Society, which is Michael Shermer's group. And, you know, they have been really driving the conversation on so-called skepticism, which is really materialistic atheism. And a lot of people confuse atheism with materialism. This breed of atheists insists that there is absolutely nothing supernatural. You know, anything, as long as we can see it or measure it, that's reality. Everything else is nonsense. And I mean, they have actually written against such insidious things as acupuncture and chiropractic in their publications. So I've had some interaction with these people, and this is one of the principal reasons I wrote the book. So let me just kind of briefly go through my arguments. I open the book with 3 test cases to see whether the atheistic materialists are on a sound footing in their attitude towards the supernatural. So this is an indirect way to approach the question of whether there is a God. If there's no supernatural dimension, obviously there's no God. But since true believers and hardcore skeptics aren't going to agree or prove anything to each other about God, this is kind of a way to approach it indirectly. So the first issue I set up is ESP. Now, funny thing about it is, one of the most famous atheists of all time, Sigmund Freud, said, you know, I've had so many telepathic experiences with my patients that I have to believe it's just a natural phenomenon. But that isn't good enough for today's skeptics and atheists. So what I do is I go through the evidence for ESP to see how honest these guys are in discussing evidence for the supernatural. And there's this fabulous book by Dean Radin, R-A-D-I-N, called The Conscious Universe. And I tell the story of the hysterical reaction to it when it came out. This is a guy who was a former Bell engineer. He was not a believer in the supernatural, and he kind of stumbled into the ESP evidence, and it shook his faith in the materialist approach. And I think anybody who reads that book or reads my chapter will understand that the skeptics are just way off base. And of course, they do their best to not have it reviewed in scientific journals and to twist the truth. But I've given them a much easier target in the next chapter, where I talk about UFOs. Now, this ought to be an easy one for them to knock out because most of the so-called UFO encounters are really not on firm ground, shall we say. So I take a few examples of well-documented UFO experiences, and I show that at the very least, whatever this phenomenon is, it deserves further scientific study, and indeed very serious scientists like J. Allen Hynek have subjected it to careful study. And the thing that's really amazing is when you read the skeptics' books, they just can't help themselves from distorting the evidence and misstating it and frankly lying, you know, which is really crazy. I mean, do you have to lie about UFOs? You can't come up with a good scientific argument, you know? I just found that astounding. Then the last one is on the evidence for afterlife. And I'm listening right now to a teaching company course by one of the skeptics, and he basically dismisses near-death experiences and people coming back to life by saying, oh, well, they're really conscious, or at least their brain is, and, you know, that's why they can report what happened while they were supposedly dead. This leaves out one little fly in the ointment for that theory, which is that people who have gone through near-death experience, their spirits travel to other places, and they can report conversations in these other locations, which might not be a problem for the atheists if they believed in ESP, which they don't. And the remarkable thing about afterlife experiences, there's actually quite a bit of pretty solid evidence about brain chemistry that shows that these things are not the result of brain malfunction. That sounds like an easy criticism, but the evidence that there is some kind of afterlife for humans and maybe animals is actually pretty solid. So the first 3 chapters, I basically pull the rug under from the materialist point of view. And lastly, philosophically, there are some really good books that respond to Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and their ilk. David Berlinski, a philosopher who calls himself a secular Jew, wrote The Devil's Delusion, Atheism and Its Scientific Pretensions. And it just shows, just from a surely logical level, that that kind of hardcore materialism isn't adequate to explain the world. And this is a factor in why many famous physicists have changed their attitude. And I would say the kind of impersonal God that is behind the laws of physics in the universe was embraced by people like Albert Einstein and Max Jammer and Erwin Schrödinger, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, and a lot of the great figures in quantum physics. So this was really a fun chapter to write, the one called Is Natural Order Due to a Higher Intelligence, and showing that the atheists really don't know what they're talking about just scientifically, and there is a reason to accept some kind of God behind reality. So that was kind of my approach to dealing with atheism, which is half the equation.
I agree, Scott. It's for the listener, it's a great chapter. The whole book is great and well worth the read. And why don't we get to the side of atheism? God Reconsidered not only reveals the failures of conventional religion, but astutely focuses on their approaches to 2 important notions, and something that everybody still struggles with today, and that is free will and suffering. Scott, why don't we start with the Abrahamic religions? How do they fail, or more like fall short, in our understanding of free will and suffering?
Well, this is, of course, the crucial question. Why is there so much suffering in the world? And the fundamental problem with the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, is that they don't have an adequate answer for this. Bart Ehrman, and I know you've interviewed him, did a really interesting book called God's Problem, How the Bible Fails to Answer a most important question, why we suffer. And so, you will often hear people say that the purpose of suffering is to teach us lessons, be it humility and compassion. They'll point to Job in the Bible, who stayed faithful despite all his suffering and so forth. Well, that's true that you can gain some lessons from suffering sometime, but quite frankly, it is a very, very inadequate explanation to say, well, the Holocaust was just a learning experience. The genocide in Rwanda was something that will ultimately did ultimately benefit them. And the bottom line is, for the Abrahamic religions, is number one, there are not really good answers for most type of suffering. Most suffering, such as the people who died of the Black Plague, cannot be justified by the notion that God is good and that there's a hidden reason for all the suffering. Now, the problems in the Bible, which Bart Ehrman has written about extensively, and for Christians, I wrote a book called Jesus Interrupted. And he showed that the Bible, for those of us who grew up in more or less fundamentalist, literalist traditions, the Bible is not to be relied on.
No.
When you take a really close look, the only reason it survives scrutiny by believers is and I was a missionary for the Mormons for 2 years, so I got to know my Bible, is that we come to it through a filter of what we think is in the Bible, which really isn't. But underlying all three traditions is a problem with free will. Traditionally, at least Christians and Jews would say, and I guess Muslims too would say, that God gave us free will so that we could be tested and he would judge us. And his foreknowledge, since he is omniscient about what we're going to do, doesn't conflict with the idea of having free will. So this is an absolute misunderstanding of foreknowledge and free will, the essence of which is this. You could say that God knows the future. He knows everything that's going to happen. And he's not the one compelling people to do this. But that isn't accurate. If you have 100% foreknowledge of what is going to happen, whether you're God or somebody who has a computer of the future or who's a time traveler or whatever, if something is absolutely going to happen and there could be no other outcome, then it doesn't matter who you blame, whether it's DNA or God who supposedly created us, but you're going to go down that road, and nothing you can do or say, such as going out on a wild drinking orgy, even though you're a believing Christian, that's in the cards. You're not going to be able to deviate from whatever you're going to do. And incidentally, I think New Agers are way, way, way too eager to jump into the idea that there is time travel and time is just this other object like a building and you can walk around it or scale it or whatever. I'm a believer in this thing called sequence, which is that the Big Bang occurred before the dinosaurs and before the fact that we can see that the universe is expanding. So I think that at least for us mundane mortals, there is sequence, and that creates a problem with foreknowledge. So that's, I think that if God did not give us adequate free will for reasons that I go into in the book, Harville Hendricks, who is Oprah's favorite marriage counselor, wrote a book called Getting the Love You Want, and he shows that very, very early in life we get programmed, and it's very difficult to break away from that. So we have a little bit of free will, but it's certainly not enough that we should be judged according to the terms of the Bible, such as knowing whether to believe in Jesus as our Savior. And we unfortunately have something today, I think the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, there's 157 that are detailed in there, and we come into this life with a tremendous amount of handicaps. And I think that the notion that God sent us here to be tested is absolutely ridiculous. You can go back into history and prehistory, and the infant mortality rate was 50%. That doesn't suggest that we are sent here to be tested. So I think that when it comes to certainly the Old Testament, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are stuck with a God who, as one atheist said, is the most evil character in fiction. So they have, this Jehovah God creature who sounds very much like the Gnostic demiurge, and they're stuck with a God who has condemned people to hell, who he created, who don't have a lot of free will. And if there was ever an explanation for why we're here, it makes absolutely no sense that the Abrahamic religions have the answer. So that's my little rant about traditional Abrahamic religions.
Yeah, and again, on this show, you're certainly preaching to the choir. So now, why don't we move on to the East, the exotic East, at least for us, and that is the faiths of Buddhism and Hinduism. And as you say in your book, they become very sexy to spiritual seekers here, just as probably Christianity has become very sexy in places like Asia and India. But in your book, you don't give them a pass either. And as we talked, that might irk a few New Agers, but that's life, right? So, Scott, how does Hinduism and Buddhism fall short on free will and suffering?
I really look into both of them quite intensely. As I mentioned, I've been to India, and I've been to Esalen Institute, and I know some Hindu thinkers, and I was, besides being irked at the militant atheists, I was kind of bothered by the fact that a lot of the progressive New Age types embrace Buddhism and Hinduism without recognizing the problems they present. So let me just treat each of these quickly or not as separate things. They are intertwined in many ways, but the first problem with Buddhism is that we really don't know much about him. When you take a really close look at the scriptures, right, even in Buddha's life, according to Buddhist scriptures, and the documents we have, there were like 18 schools. They disagreed with each other. Buddha did not like to be drawn into metaphysical speculation, and so he left his followers with quite a bit of vagueness about some of the big questions. So the second problem is Mahayana Buddhism, which is the dominant form, arose about 600 years after Buddha, and it claimed to be the secret teachings. Now, it's unclear to me why it took 500, 600 years for mankind to get to the point where they were spiritually prepared to receive this secret wisdom, but I don't really buy it. I can understand why Mahayana Buddhism is popular, because it appeals to the masses. It says everybody can be enlightened. You don't have to be a monk. But there are so many variations in Buddhism that you can't even talk about it as a single religion. The differences between Nichiren Shoshu, and I did the Nam Myoho Renge Kyo mantra for a while to try that out, where the founder denounced other forms of Buddhism as demonically inspired, and Chinese Pure Land Buddhism, which basically says that Amitabha is the Buddha of infinite light. He's going to save everybody. And actually, one form of it, Joda Shinshu, says we're already enlightened. There's really no difference between enlightenment and ordinary life. So you have these wildly different interpretations of Buddha that make it difficult to really call it one religion. And you have to think that if Buddha was the great teacher of the truth, why do his followers have so many conflicts? Now, I have a couple of other criticisms of Buddhism. One is it says all suffering is due to attachment. Really? So, in the Holocaust, the Jews were just attached to being incinerated. That is the explanation? I don't think so.
No.
Second problem is the idea of the no self. Now, Buddhists love to play with this and brag about it because it's kind of fun to mess with people's heads, saying that there's no soul. The reality, of course, is that most Buddhists sure act like they got a soul. They are doing all their rituals and everything as if they think it makes a difference, as if they have a will. And I think the notion that we all change, and therefore that means there can't be a soul, is misguided. Listen, I don't have the same cells in my body as I did when I was in kindergarten, but I can remember kindergarten anyway. And I think when you get into the evidence for entities surviving death, even animals, which I discuss in the book, it suggests that actually some kind of personality does transcend death. Therefore, since these central ideas of the no self and suffering is entirely due to attachment, since they seem to not stand up to scrutiny, I don't regard Buddhism as a serious contender for the truth. So, you also asked about Hinduism. Now, I kind of like mainstream Hinduism as practiced in India, which worships various deities, and it's kind of a spiritist religion, shamanistic, you might say. I think that is a pretty good report on reality. I've been into Jain temples and participated in the rituals, talked to Indian philosophers, and I think mainstream Hinduism has much to commend to it. They don't get too hung up about getting to the point of enlightenment. My bone to pick really is Advaita Vedanta, which is what's principally known here in the West, which basically says, in its most radical form, there is no reality beyond Brahman. We are illusions. We are hallucinations of Brahman. So that raises the first question, why should we, A, be worshiping a being who is hallucinating us? And if we're hallucinations, why are we doing all these rituals and doing all these things to transcend this world? I mean, it's a contradiction, and nobody really wants to recognize it. Now, there were actually other Advaita philosophers, Ramanuja and Madhva, who did not go that far. They agreed that we had a separateness and that we could join Brahman. But I think the best critique, it comes from other Hindu philosophers, the mainstream Hindus, who say, listen, that sense of transcendent and oneness that Shankara and the Advaita teachers say is the ultimate experience, that's not the ultimate experience. The yogis in mainstream Hinduism say you can go beyond that. And, of course, the fact that people can have that sense of oneness with Brahman and then they return back to ordinary existence suggests that actually they didn't merge with Brahman. They had an experience which I think one could say they misinterpreted. And like I say, the yogis in Hinduism I would regard as pretty good authorities on the hereafter. Now, where I also have a problem with conventional Hinduism is the idea of reincarnation, and especially the kind of New Agey form that we're familiar with in the West, which basically says you want to be reborn so that you have another chance to make progress. So life is really about repeated rebirth and gradually moving up the chain to enlightenment. There's a couple of problems with this. Number one, as I explained earlier, the world is so messed up that throughout the millennia, you would be really lucky if you survived infancy. And apparently, given the fact that most people were born into third world countries and died from famine or smallpox or tsunamis, apparently people were going backwards. You cannot argue, and certainly nobody in India would argue, that the world today is a much more spiritual place. The problem with reincarnation, which actually the Buddhists don't believe in because there's no self to be reincarnated, they call it, I think Ken Wilber said, well, it's just a magnetized collection of karma. So, why bother if that's what it really is? But for mainstream Hinduism and the New Age version, it actually works in reverse. The more times you are reborn, you're born into a different dysfunctional family, a different culture that maybe has a different spiritual tradition from Hinduism in all likelihood. And the so-called evidence for rebirth doesn't hold up under scrutiny. People claim that they remember their prior lives, usually as Cleopatra or, Patrick Henry or some famous person.
Right.
never seems to be a peasant in
slave in
Africa.
Egypt. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real mystery, or for that matter, an ant. And I'm not sure how you can get up from what good deeds does an ant need to do to get up to the point of becoming a grasshopper or whatever the higher thing is. The more you look at it, the less it makes sense. Now, Scott Rogel wrote this great book called Search for Yesterday. And he demolishes the evidence for reincarnation in the conventional form. He finally concluded that, maybe there's this magnetized karma thing that might be picked up by a mother, possibly. But the conventional idea that we are reborn to advance spiritually works in exactly the reverse. And the numbers of the 70 billion people who have lived on the planet, when you try to calculate that out, and then you start thinking, now, why was it that, human beings were a pretty recent development? Why did we have to go through hundreds of millions of years of dinosaurs and other forms of life? It's a little hard to understand. Yes, maybe the dinosaurs had a hard time collecting good karma because they were eating each other or something, but it's a very naive idea, and the so-called reincarnation evidence can be explained in other ways, such as influence from spirits. And I do believe that there are spirits, and I believe that they do try to influence people, which is why you have supernatural intervention for Hinduism, for Catholicism with the Virgin Mary. Certainly the Mormons have many reports of angelic visitations. The Prophet Muhammad was illiterate, but he dictated the Quran, which is very beautiful in the original Arabic. So there are spirits out there actively working to supposedly promote certain faiths. And I think these spirits explain a lot of the aspects of religion and why people believe what they do.
So why don't we get to, what is really the topic of this show? God Reconsidered culminates with the third and overlooked ethos or philosophy of those perennial heretics called the Gnostics. Scott, tell us why this is a viable alternative beyond the fact everything else has put mankind on the brink of destruction for the last 2,000 years.
Yes, that should be their claim to fame. And I should add that, the Hindus and the Buddhists, these are not gentle faiths if you actually look at it. So the first of all, what I think that Gnosticism offers is clarification of, as one of the Gnostic scriptures says, whence we came, why we're here, and where are we going, essentially. And it counters the big lie of religion that, God rested after 6 days of creation and said creation is good. Creation is not good. And you don't have to be a big pessimist and depressed and pull the covers over your head. It can give you calmness when you realize that both spirits and other factors have really conspired to pull the wool over our eyes. Once you see the greater reality, whether mystically or through study, you really can't go back. It's tough to return to mainstream religions when you've experienced or understood the truth. I mean, if you remember Voltaire's Candide, I think it's Dr. Pangloss, goes on this series of adventures, and no matter what happens, he says, oh, that's for the greater good. God meant that, it'll all work out, which is kind of like the New Age or conventional religion approach to reality. No, let us call a spade, that the world has been filled with evil that doesn't teach us proportional lessons. And I think that the central insight, what you might call mitigated dualism, which is that this reality, the material reality, is not the important one. It's a burden that we are given for whatever reason. As mortals, we're not going to ever fully understand the truth. And one good example of that is that I remember George Anderson, who was one of the genuine mediums, I think, he once asked the spirits, is there reincarnation? Now, you would think the spirits would know, but they said, we've heard about it. We don't really know. So what exactly happens when we get to the other side is a matter of a great deal of speculation. All religions are basically like the blind man feeling the elephant, and my feeling is that the Gnostic philosophers really got the important insight in that this world is not good, and that you can relax and not be so anxious about trying to get yourself saved, whether it's spinning Buddhist prayer wheels or making sacrifices to the Hindu deities or showing up at evangelical church every Sunday and, donating your money to get the message of Jesus out. Gnosticism says, relax, here's the insight, and then you can kind of take it from there as to how you want to apply that to your life.
Exactly. And in your view, how do the Gnostics better deal, or at least give an alternative to the notion of free will?
Well, first of all, if you understand that we are limited, you don't get overly worked up about the fact that we can't know everything. And the fact that we are able to get what I call inspired insight or gnosis into the nature of reality, in contradiction to all the brainwashing that all of us have gone through, I think that gets us started on the right track. And I do think that we need to become involved in spiritual practices. Just to give you an example, I go as often as I can to Ecclesia Gnostica, Bishop Stefan Heller's church in Los Angeles. I do believe that the Eucharist does raise spiritual energy, and I benefit psychologically, emotionally, spiritually from that. I have an altar that I set up, and every day I call upon the deities and the spirits of the dead that might be helpful to me, to guide me. And I've had many, many experiences that give me the impression that my life is being guided. And Sandra and I have been around the world on some pretty exotic travels, and we might end up writing a book like Michael Crichton's Travels, which is basically the story of his adventures in the world that made him realize that the materialistic explanation of science for the nature of reality wasn't the whole thing. And he wrote a little speech he was supposed to give to the Skeptics Society in Pasadena, and when they got wind of it, they canceled it. So he put it in the appendix of his book, Travels. And we've found ourselves divinely guided wherever we've gone. And I think that, once you find your spiritual path, your anxiousness about the things of this world is reduced. And for me, in the past 10 years, it's been a tremendous adventure. And so I wanted to share what I've discovered about it and about the other faiths that I investigated. That's why I wrote the book.
Again, it's a great book, and it preaches to the choir for the listeners of this show. And again, it should be a viable alternative. Like you said, I like what you said about how Gnosis shows you the path, where this path leads. That's up to you. It reminds me of what Jeremy Puma said, Gnosis isn't the solution, it brings solutions. Would you agree with that, Scott?
Yes, I think that as long as you're wandering around the world saying that everything is good because God said it's good, you can do some good in the world, but you're definitely on the wrong path. Every other religion lies about why we're here, They try to make a bad thing a good thing. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be anxious about it. It just means that with that clarification, you can go around and do some good. I think that Gnostics should not be really tempted to withdraw from life because we are here. I think it behooves us to take care of our health, to be civically involved, to try to be mentally healthy. And good things can come out of that. I mean, the Cathars had a pretty healthy society, but, you know, they didn't fully withdraw from the world, and the leaders were known as the good people. And from my point of view, that is kind of the archetype of Gnostic society. And I think that we can certainly bring a message of comfort and a spiritual path to people that feel lost when it comes to other religions.
Oh, I agree. And it's very interesting. You were talking about Candide, the protagonist meets a Manichaean, and the word Manichaean has come to mean somebody who's very negative and surly and so forth. But what's interesting is wherever the Manichaeans went and the Cathars, they really touched something with the general population. People loved being around them. They loved their message and everything. So I'm sure you disagree with this idea that Gnosticism is a sort of negative, bordering on nihilism kind of faith.
You know, I practically fell off my chair when I was listening to a teaching company course on the problem of evil. And halfway into it, he says, you know, it's a really good thing that the Catholic Church beat out the Gnostics for heading up Christianity, because if the Gnostics had gotten in control of the church, you know, they would have been very anti-Semitic. And I'm thinking, does this guy really know the history of the Catholic Church? Because I've written about the Catholic Church and the Holocaust. So anybody who, and I could say can understandably, with all the propaganda there's been out there, think of Gnosticism as just something negative, really doesn't understand it. And I do believe today that the resurgence of interest in Gnosticism, whether it's Dan Brown's novels, which may not be faithful and accurate, but at least it shows that there's a hunger for it, and other things, the popularity of Jung shows that the underground faith is coming back. I was really astounded a few months ago when National Geographic, for their places to visit in 2014, put down, I think there were just like 10 of these, Cathar country. Wow. And it gave a little description about, you know, the Cathar faith. I mean, clearly they have an editor, a freelance writer, or somebody who is a closet Gnostic, and he got that little Trojan horse in. And so, you know, I will also say that my wife and I, we live about 2 blocks north of the biggest Halloween street parade in the world, 500,000 people in West Hollywood. And about every other year, we will dress up as Jehovah and Mrs. Jehovah, and we'll go down and stand on a little platform with a sign, you know, that says basically, I'm Jehovah, this is my wife, bow down and worship us. The number of pictures that are taken and the number of people that laugh and give us the thumbs up is truly astonishing. So at least in our corner of the world, people are really becoming familiar with the alternative to the official propaganda about God. And if people want to know more, GodReconsidered.com will tell them when the book comes out. Like I say, hopefully on Amazon next month, at least starting with an ebook. And, you know, if people like what I have to say, they find it useful, then they can pass it on to others. And, you know, I don't want to disturb other people's faith, but there are enough seekers out there that might find this to be useful and comforting and enlightening.
And to end, I always like to ask this to any guest who has a relation with Gnosticism. What would be more or less a short answer to what is Gnosis, and what do you see the Gnostic legacy on modern culture?
Well, I think that one can say that Gnosis is inspired insight into the nature of reality, and it's not something like this fake relationship with a fake savior that evangelicals promote. And I think that it makes you aware of the nature of reality, and then there are lots of ways that you can pursue that and the implications. I always tell people to start with Stefan Heller's Gnosticism, and your book, and Richard Smoley, and Andrew Smith, and some of the others have written eloquently, and I think that's a good place to start to see what Gnosis means for daily life. I think the legacy is could be taken back to the Hermetic tradition and the Renaissance, on which all of Western civilization is really founded. And it's like the underground stream. And people who feel drawn to this will find that there is an explanation for why we're here and what we can do to improve our daily life, our spiritual lives. And, a lot of Gnostics, I think, are kind of very individualist and laid back. But the Cathars and the Manichaeans were missionary faiths, and I think that there is value, who knows, maybe good karma, in spreading the word. So the purpose of my book is to say, let's enhance the legacy of the contribution to Gnosticism, and maybe, who knows, maybe it will help save civilization such as we have it today.
Agreed. We can use it more, and of course, hopefully that doesn't mean suddenly more people will start remember that they were once in a past incarnation a Cathar perfect or something like that. Hopefully that won't happen.
We may have to put up with that, but fortunately, Gnostics are a tolerant group, so we are heretics, so we can tolerate people who are heretics from our own faith.
There you go. Well, I think that's all the time we have today, Scott. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and discussing God Reconsidered.
Thanks for the opportunity, and we'll do it again maybe when the book comes out.
I hope so. Well, thank you very much, and have a good day.
Great.